Hello and welcome to the Celtic Way morning briefing. We have Alison McConnell with us today. How's it going, Alison?
Very well, thank you. A nice, beautiful autumnal morning in Glasgow, crisp and sunny. One of my favourites.
Good. Right, so it's back to Premiership action after a wee international break there. Motherwell first up at Fir Park, a team actually still sitting ahead of Celtic in the league table so far in fourth. They got a creditable draw with Rangers earlier in the season, although apart from that I would say the results have probably been just as expected. So in general, what's your thoughts ahead of the game? Is it another potential banana skin for Celtic?
I think it is. I think every game at the minute is must win for Celtic. I think we're probably sick of hearing that. But I do think just the fact that they've lost ground so early in the campaign means that you don't want there to be any further daylight between yourselves and the top of the table. I think also it's about getting a consistent run of form now and trying to piece together a bit of momentum. I think Motherwell will be hard. I think Motherwell at Fir Park are a fairly difficult proposition. I think they've exceeded expectations this season. I saw them earlier on in a few League Cup games this summer and I thought they looked poor. I thought there was no fluency to their play. I thought it looked as though they'd maybe introduced too many people. They got their act together very quickly in terms of the league. I think you can sense a confidence in them. I think you can sense a confidence in a number of their players. I think Tony Watt has been good so far this season. It's been an impressive start to the campaign. He looks fit, he looks sharp, looks hungry, playing some of the best football of his career and the most consistent football of his career. I think Kevin Van Veen's been a good addition to them. I think when he's in the mood, he can be a handful for defences. So I don't think it'll be a straightforward afternoon at Celtic, but I think essentially now it's about finding a way, regardless of how. And I think you saw that at Aberdeen, and I think it might be a similar kind of game.
I think as much as I take your point that the League Cup, they didn't look great. They've been quite good in the league, but I still think when you look at the results, given the likes of Aberdeen have been so poor, I would say that looking at Motherwell's results, they've not particularly upset the odds apart from that Rangers draw. Mm-hmm. I think losing to Hibs and Hearts is probably to be expected for Motherwell, especially the way Hibs and Hearts are playing this season. Drawing with St Johnstone, I mean St Johnstone are still good, but they're not necessarily the team of last season. I think that was maybe a fair assumption before the game. Beating Dundee, yes, beating Aberdeen because of the way Aberdeen have been playing, and then beating Ross County. I think that's probably about what you'd expect. And throw in the fact that they lost to Dundee in the League Cup, which was probably a disappointment for them. I think although they have 100% had a positive start, I mean, as I said, they're still sitting above Celtic, but I don't necessarily think it's a team that's like an outstanding form that Celtic need to be overly wary of.
I think what you're facing is a team who are full of confidence at the minute. I think what you're facing is a team who have had a fairly solid start to the season, and what that gives you is a sense of belief as a team, a sense of belief in the principles that you're playing to, and a belief in one another. And I think that can be pretty formidable when you're trying to break a team like that down. I think maybe you saw that at Ibrox at half time. I think they were a goal down at the break, but didn't fold. Had enough about them to say, right, let's go and have a go in the second half. And I think sometimes that's what winning gives you, is just the confidence to be able to approach the game like that. So I think so much depends on how Celtic start, how they go about the game. And I think what we've seen from Celtic repeatedly over, not this season, but last season too, is just that inability at times to deal with adversity in games, to cope with going behind or being pegged back. And I think in some ways you don't want to be doing that tomorrow. I think you want to get a fairly solid head of steam up and start the game with a fair bit of momentum, just so that you're not offering Motherwell any encouragement to come back into it.
Yeah, I think certainly this season for Celtic, an early goal has been vital to not just settle the nerves, but get the confidence up and also get the teams, because the vast majority of the teams in Scotland will sit back once they go 1-0 down. If they go 1-0 down early, they've got to try and get something from the game, which just opens it up even more. So I think that is vital. I think that Andy, when he done his Motherwell preview, looking at the way that they play, and he touched on it yesterday as well, they enjoy a counter-attack and a cross. So we're going to come to the predicted lineups in a minute, but I think, would you agree that although Celtic will still dominate possession, and obviously it's a tighter pitch, the onus is almost just as much on the Celtic defence to find a way to prevent those individual mistakes as much as anything else that have been prevalent so far this season, just as vital. That will be just as vital as what happens further up the pitch.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think sometimes when you have a solid footing at the back, I think it just sets the tone for the team. I think it gives the freedom to play from middle to front, and I think that's what Celtic have lacked. Again, going back, it's not a new problem. It's been there for a long while. I think some of the cheapness of the goals leaves you scratching your head at times. I think the softness of them. I think sometimes you look at the lack of communication across the back line, and I think those are things that you can eradicate. I think those are things that even if there's a question mark over quality, I think some of the ease with which teams have been able to open Celtic up and the cheapness of the goals conceded is appalling, to be frank. And I think that is something that needs to be eradicated. I do wonder about what the international break might have done for guys like Joe Hart, who's obviously not been away, but has had an opportunity to train maybe with a few of the guys that would still have been around up at Lennoxtown, likes of Anthony Ralston or whatever, and just maybe communicate, learn again about the key to communication, and just there are times when you've seen mix-ups by trying to play the ball out at times when it's not on, and just inviting pressure unnecessarily at times.
On the individual errors and stuff that we're touching on there, do you think it's probably a mix, I suppose, but would you think it's as much concentration as anything, or is it the fact that it's new players playing in a new team, possibly in a new style that they haven't played? Is it the individuals themselves? Is it just a mix of all three?
My own feeling would be that it's probably a mix of all three. I'm not sure it would be attributable to any one particular factor. I think you would question whether or not it's a lack of concentration. I think if you play professional football, I'm not sure that that's a qualifying exemption, that you lose concentration in a game. But I think maybe a mixture of all three. And I think too, sometimes just the sense of fragility, a sense of uneasiness in one another when things are against you, and when you are conceding goals like that, I think it can be quite difficult to get out the bit. I think it comes back to the point we made earlier about finding ways to win games regardless of how you do it. And I think that will probably go in terms of clean sheets too. I think if you could get one or two clean sheets to just try and build on the foundations of a defensive backline, and you would like to see a bit of consistency in terms of personnel selection, the same players playing together, to get to know one another, to learn to communicate a bit easier. I think Christopher Julian coming back, again, we've spoken about this to death, but I think Julian coming back does give an extra element. I think it gives another option, and I think he's probably the best centre half at the club. So I think you should think that you're coming back to a stronger hand as time goes on.
In terms of team selection, I'm going to trouble you for a rough predicted 11. Obviously based on what we know so far, so with the caveat that Ange Postecoglou could spring a volleyball and goalie-esque surprise, what would your ideal starting 11 be for tomorrow?
I think there's still question marks over the fitness of Juranovic. I'm not sure if he's back yet or not. I think he had that hamstring issue. I think the likelihood was that he was due back after the international break, but I think we'll need to wait and hear later this afternoon whether or not that's going to happen. If he's not back and Greg Taylor's obviously still out, I wonder if it means Montgomery starts at left back, and I think you'll see Starkveld and Carter Vickers with probably Ralston then if Juranovic is still out. I think it'll be the trio in midfield that we've come to see so often this season. I think Callum McGregor and then David Turnbull and Tom Rogic, and then what I think you'll have is Jota, Kyogo and Abada.
In terms of the midfield there, that's the one that sticks out to me. Do you not think there's any chance he goes with the same as he was against Aberdeen and keeps Near Beaton in there with Callum McGregor and Turnbull? Maybe Rogic is the game changer off the bench after the travelling he's been doing with Australia?
I think it's a consideration. I think it might have given him food for thought. The fact that Rogic came on and was able to turn the game at Pittodrie. My own feeling is that I think he'll stick to the more tried and tested.
I suppose the debate would be if he does stick with Beaton from the Aberdeen game, or even puts James McCarthy in, if he wants a genuine game changer on the bench like he had against Aberdeen with Rogic sitting there, then that would precipitate a more advanced role for Callum McGregor, but is it because you think they're going to dominate possession so much, you're almost as well having McGregor as a single pivot to enable you to have more attacking players ahead of him, therefore more chance to break down Motherwell, basically?
I think McGregor is just so important in that role. I think you've seen it time and time again this season in terms of what he offers. I also think his work rate ensures that he adds a layer of protection to the back line. I think my own feeling is you do get probably more out of him in a more advanced sense. I think he links the play with the forwards. I think he's got a goal in him, as you've seen. I think there'll be a wariness though about Motherwell and the problems that they could present to.
I think it's also to be remembered that this is another international break where Callum McGregor's proven his worth to the Scotland squad, where maybe some don't necessarily value it as much, or didn't seem to value it as much. And I think that's another string to his bow now, that maybe obviously the Celtic fans already know, but maybe the wider audience would have appreciated a wee bit more when he wasn't there. Same as when Celtic, when he didn't have him for those few weeks, it was clear that it was a big miss. In terms of the forwards that you picked there, I agree with you. I think Kyogo will start through the middle. When it comes to the wings, unless James Forrest happens to be fit to start, I think it looks quite limited personnel-wise still. I think you've basically got to go with Jota and Abada, although that's no stretch to go with them. I think given that both of us agree that that's going to be the front three, with Georgios Giakoumakis on the bench against Aberdeen and now being almost 2 weeks later, would you agree that gives possibly an ideal option to change things up if required? By which I mean him coming on through the middle and then Kyogo shifting wide to kind of rotate the wing players?
I do, and I actually did wonder whether or not he might actually have been tempted to start him, because he'll obviously be a bit fresher now in terms of having come back from the injury, and Kyogo is obviously coming back off the back of a fair amount of travelling too. So I did wonder whether or not he might have started him through the middle. I think the likelihood is he'll probably come on off the bench, but what I think he does do is give you the option to change it in terms of how you set up, but also how you play too. I think you could be a bit more direct if you find yourself struggling in the game. I think he maybe offers a different style of playing if you want to take it. I think it's been a tough start for him. We've not really seen anything that he's got to offer yet. I think the jury's still very much out in what he brings. But I still have question marks over whether or not he would be handed a starting jersey just yet.
Rob McEwen thinking that Big Ange is going to start, the big Greek as he calls him.
I did think
so it's that time again then, finally, before we leave you all. Can I trouble you for a score prediction, Alison?
I'm going to say Celtic 2-1.
Well, as much as I've just talked about defence doing their bit, my best mate's actually convinced me it's going to be a high-scoring game tomorrow, so I'm going to go for 4-1 Celtic.
Oh well,
and on that note, that's slightly controversial note possibly. Thank you all for joining us today, and remember to hit that subscribe button if you're tuning in on YouTube, so you get notified the instant that we're going live. Thanks again. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you. Have a lovely weekend.